I'm sorry? Yeah, because I would ask you to get everything from my land, but and I would
Bet. But thank you for asking.
Caitlin on vacation.
Caitlin has gone off to graduate school, and Jared Gilmore is now trying to keep me in order.
Oh, great.
Good luck, Jared. We hire them young because it takes a lot of energy to keep me in order. Anyway, thanks for coming, everybody. I'm Dave Cook from the Monitor. Our guest this morning is Representative Ed Royce, Chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. This is his first visit with the Better Journalism Through Sausage Club, so we're especially grateful to him for doing this on a Friday morning. He's a native Californian and a graduate of California State University Fullerton's School of Business Administration. His interest in politics is long-standing. While in school, he belonged to the Young Americans for Freedom at Cal State and headed Youth for Reagan in the Gipper's 1976 challenge to then President Gerald Ford.
Just executive director in Cal.
Still
anything that ambitious.
Very early. After a brief career in the private sector, in 1982, our guest was elected to the California State Senate, where he was very active in victims' rights issues, authoring what the Almanac of American Politics says was the first law to make it a felony to stalk someone. He was elected to the U.S. House in 1992 and has been reelected by wide margins ever since. He's been a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee since coming to Congress and was named its chair in November of 2012. So much for biography. Now on to the ever-popular process portion of our program. As always, we're on the record here. Please, no live blogging or tweeting. In short, no filing of any kind while the breakfast is underway to give us time to actually listen to what our guest says. There's no embargo when the session ends. To save you the trouble of having to grab a breakfast photo on your smartphone, we will email several pictures of the session to all reporters here as soon as the breakfast ends. As regular attendees know, if you'd like to ask a question, please do the traditional thing and send me a subtle, non-threatening signal, and I'll happily call on one and all. We're going to start off by offering our guests the opportunity to make some opening remarks. Then we'll move to questions from around the table. With that, sir, thanks again for coming. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks for the opportunity. Well, let me begin by saying that I was a fan of Reagan's, and one of the things I noticed about his conduct on the Hill was the way that he and Tip O'Neill conducted themselves. And it was a way in which I think created an atmosphere in which things could be accomplished on the Hill. One of my objectives on my committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee, has been to try to create a similar type of dialogue. And with Elliot Engel, my ranking member, and myself, what we have attempted to do with the members is to get them all involved in foreign affairs, to create a very open dialogue, to create a balanced way in which they not only participate, but we have these delegations which are engaged, which we take overseas, whether it's to Ukraine recently or to the Middle East or to Asia, and try to reach a consensus to do our job in a way that provides a united front in terms of the U.S. position in these parts of the world. And I would say, I think so far we've been largely successful in that endeavor on the committee. I will just give you a few examples of areas that we've been involved in, and then I know you want to ask questions, but if I could give you sort of a broad overview here of some of the concerns that I've had about how the United States could be more effective overseas. And one of those has been with our communications, Secretary Clinton and others, and they say the current system is practically defunct. So we have passed legislation over to the Senate. We're working on this right now, and we believe it could have a very big impact, could create a very real change to the way in which we can effectively offset propaganda in Russia or lack of information in the Middle East, and provide access for people to have more ideas about political pluralism and tolerance in China. On another subject, we have spent a great deal of time on the committee following the situation in Iran. Remember, for many of these members in the Foreign Affairs Committee, they have a lot of experience over the years with deception on the part of the government in Iran. And one of our concerns was to find pressure points where we might be able to get the Iranians to the table. We did that with legislation on sanctions, And in this session, we've passed legislation authored by me and co-sponsored by Elliot Engel, which really gives the Ayatollah a choice between compromise on the nuclear program or economic collapse. Now, we were able to pass that bill out of committee with bipartisan support unanimously and pass it off of the floor with 400 votes to 20. The administration opposed the legislation, but it was our opinion on the committee, those of us with experience in foreign affairs, that this type of pressure was necessary in order to be taken seriously, in order for the U.S. position to be taken seriously. The administration has held the legislation up in the Senate, but as you know, we're close to 2/3. And as the situation continues to drag on, and of course this week some of you will be following our Secretary of State and Wendy Sherman's further negotiations in Vienna with the Iranians on this, but it's a good reminder in terms of the nature of this regime as we now see that these M302s, these very long-range rockets, which Iran transferred to Hamas last night, were being launched. And they can, of course, hit Tel Aviv, they can hit Jerusalem. It's a reminder that whatever negotiations we have ongoing with Iran, there is this history of deception, which was shared with us by the international agencies which conduct oversight with respect to the attempts to get Iran to comply with the UN Security Council resolutions and with international norms of behavior. So these are some of the issues we're working on. A third issue would be trying to open the markets overseas to U.S. exports. As you know, we're in competition with China with two very different models. The United States is trying to sell the ideal of opening to trade to our exports overseas with high standards for intellectual property, high standards with respect to these issues like indigenous innovation and so forth, trying to set a implementation. And in South Asia and East Asia, that's very important right now. With that said, why don't we open it up to your questions? Yes.
I'll ask a long-winded question to give you a chance to take a bite if you wish to. Is that still your view, sir, or are there other issues that have eclipsed that in terms of being the most important threat to the U.S.?
Well, we were on track to take some steps to offset the danger from Iran. One of those was the interceptor program that we had worked with the Czech Republic and with Poland to put in place a program that if Iran developed an ICBM program and if they were irrational actors, one of the worries in Europe was what steps could Europe take to protect itself, and that program would have protected Europe. Importantly, it also would have protected the United States. With the decision by the President of the United States to pull that system, to not go forward with that system in order to reset the relationship with Russia, in order to meet Putin's demand that we not move forward with that system intended to defend against an Iranian launch, we've basically left ourselves open. So it is very, very important that we either succeed in these negotiations with Iran and convince it not to move forward with its nuclear weapons program, or that we go forward, if we fail to do that, with the initiative that I and Elliot Engel have authored that's over in the Senate today, which would truly leave the Ayatollah with no choice but to compromise away his program, nuclear weapons program. Our concern is his comment not long ago that the ICBM program is a responsibility of the military and they need to mass produce ICBMs. And obviously what he is saying, because he's the chief decision maker, what messages he's sending to his military about ramping up ICBM production and refusing to make that part of the agreement leaves those in could work with the government in Mexico in order to help them develop, and in order to pressure them, frankly, because that is something, the other part of that equation, pressure them to seal that border with Guatemala, and also the fact that in Guatemala and in Honduras and El Salvador, you have a circumstance where the political leadership there in the government is aiding and abetting this messaging, probably because it partly results in remittances to the extent that these 16, 17-year-old young people, when these children get to the United States, I think the expectation is that they'll find themselves into the workforce and the remittances will go back to those countries, and that's an advantage. Lastly, it's a pressure valve probably also in these governments, and these are largely dysfunctional governments to the extent that the United States weighs in with pressure on these regimes and pushes for policies which are responsible and also in policies which do not encourage the citizens to make this very dangerous trek all the way up through Mexico to the U.S. But there's other steps, obviously, that the administration should be taking, can be taking. One is the messaging in Central America that immigration fraud, those who commit immigration fraud will be returned. These cases that we speak to are cases of fraud. When you're talking about the original intent of the provisions under a code to protect those who are trafficked for sexual abuse into the United States, the argument that that is going to blanketly cover, all Central American children who come over the border, that is not true, and the president needs to explain that to audiences in Central America very forcefully, that they are not covered under that provision and that they will be returned. I think that type of messaging would go a long way to changing a situation which is compounding arithmetically. And that's an essential part of the solution.
Patricia?
Thank you. I'd like to ask you about with the July 20th deadline coming up, I wanted to get your view of the possibility of an extension, which I described to you as would be a near miracle. Would you be one along an extension? Would you be comfortable with? Would you be open at all to any additional modest sanctions relief, or just keeping the current JPOA in place? And I had a question about the letter that
Right. Myself and Elliot Engel sent.
Yesterday. I wasn't sure about some of the verbiage about the financial system. What would be the effect of that? Is it an effort to insist on broader non-nuclear sanctions relief, issues, tying the sanctions to issues that are not related to the nuclear program, or if you could?
Well, first we had, obviously, if the Iranian intent is undetectable nuclear breakout, then that tells us something about their state of mind, but even more so, the fact that they insist on taking this off the table. The fact also that their work on miniaturization of a nuclear warhead, the site at Perichin, now this is one where the IAEA, the international organization that monitors, wants access to that site. During these negotiations, we've seen them take several steps. We've seen them remove dirt from the site where they've done their nuclear testing. Then we've seen them bring in new earth. Then, for good measure, after they've knocked down the buildings, we've seen them asphalt the whole area. But they're still too reticent to allow the IAEA to come in and check. Obviously, what the checks would show is that they probably violated the other agreements that they've had. And if they're in the process of violating agreements, how willing are they? Remember Reagan's old adage, trust but verify? How willing are they going to be in terms of the verification process? Congress has these questions because we know human nature. We know the zeal for a deal. We have seen that before with respect to the North Korean situation. And having gone down that road before, we want to make sure that this agreement is verifiable. And so, yes, we're weighing in. And to your question about how long will they draw this out, my suspicion is that they're going to try to play for time, because as they do, they continue to enrich more and more. And another observation would be that their demand at the end of the day is that the inspections cease after a period of time, let's say 10 years, and after that they're treated like any other power on the world stage. Well, at that point, obviously, they could go forward without any oversight, without any real ability for us to be able to slow their rush to weaponization. So these are all questions that we are concerned about in Congress, and this is the very reason why we passed our legislation into the Senate. Our suspicion was that if the Senate could have taken that up, we would have had the necessary leverage to get the agreement needed, because we would have had the pressure with the additional sanctions that would force an agreement that really was verifiable.
Would you agree to an extension?
A little louder.
Would we agree to an extension? Well, again, the whole problem is that they're playing for time. So, we would have hearings on that. I would consult with Elliot Engel and the other members of the committee on this subject. We'd have to see the details of what we're talking about. But I suspect what I'm going to hear from the members of the committee is this is the very reason why we felt the administration, rather than to stop our legislation in the Senate, should have allowed it to go into effect, because then the incentive would be not for the Iranians to have an extension, but want to get a deal sooner rather than later because of the costs on their economy.
We're going to go next to John Gizzi, Howard LaFranchi, and Michael Crowley. John?
Thank you, Dave. Mr. Chairman, you've spoken about streamlining and overhauling the communications network and broadcasting.
Many of these societies is the foundation in an understanding of what we take for granted in this system of ours. Freedom of speech, the ability of people to feel secure that they can put out this idea of political pluralism. Tolerance as a virtue. I mean, these were things that were communicated during the Cold War into Eastern Europe very effectively. How do we know the difference between what would happen to societies that did not hear this message? Because we have Yugoslavia as an example. The decision was made in the United States never to broadcast into Yugoslavia. And I remember a young Croatian journalist, younger than anyone here at this table, who said to me, all we had to listen to was the hate radio coming from the Serbs, the hate radio coming from us Croats, the hate radio that came from some of the Bosnian stations. And he said, if we could have ever heard what was broadcast into the Czechoslovakia, why in Czechoslovakia that partition occurred, first they got their independence, and then they partitioned the country without the loss of one life. And he said, I listened to Václav Havel talk about what he learned on those broadcasts. I never learned any of that. All I learned was hate. So at a time when Russia is really ramping up, for those of you who are listening to the conspiratorial theories that come out of RT these days, at a time when China is also, really spinning information, wouldn't it be good if people were grounded in what we know worked and in what created tolerance? Now, to go to John Gizzi's point, before we get to elections as part of democracy, there's a deeper foundation there in human rights. And I would start with that. I would start with this idea of tolerance, the idea of religious tolerance, the ideal, of allowing everybody freedom of speech and these other more basic concepts. I would gradually build towards democratic governance, but I think that the world today needs a better, deeper appreciation just of human rights. And I think if we do that, there's a real thirst for it. I listen to the broadcast that we do into China, and I listen because now we do it in all the different dialects. I passed legislation some years ago to do this, and you can see that they're just starting to grapple with some of the foundation of what's really needed to create among the public a desire for more space, for more in the way of rights. And I think John, if we could do that, if the administration could be supportive in that way, I think our legislation will probably pass. We're getting a tremendous amount of support. I think we can get it through the Senate. But it would be good to have the administration pay more attention to it. And I have gotten a lot of bipartisan support from those in the past who have been involved in this process of trying to communicate into these societies. I think it's enormously important. But I think elections is just one note, as a Spanish philosopher, as Santa Anna said, in this whole song of democracy. And it requires a much deeper understanding, and it's an evolutionary process for a lot of societies.
Howard?
Yes.
Of what happened in the 30s and 40s, of ignoring that individual. When somebody says something along the lines of what was put into Mein Kampf, about eliminating a race of people, or eliminating, in this case, the state of Israel. And again, to put this into context, in his mind, Israel is simply the little Satan. We're the great Satan. He's been very, very vocal about his animus toward other religions, and especially towards a society that believes in freedom of religion like our own. And so, in this context, it's wise to be able to guarantee the security of the West in these negotiations with Iran.
Leslie?
I wanted to just get your thoughts on the revelation with the spying of Germany and.
Oh, the revelation.
Yes. Are you worried about obviously the CIA station chief? Are you worried about the U.S. posture as far as relations with the country?
I met yesterday with a delegation from Germany on this subject. And as you can see, with the decision to remove the station chief in Germany, you can see how seriously the situation is taken in Germany by the government. The one thing I would say is that it would be wise for the German elected representatives to inquire about the activities of their own intelligence services overseas with respect to the issue in terms of perspective.
Like a statecraft versus.
Well, I think I've put it effectively.
On President Putin is kicking off a tour of Latin America that was expected to be today.
He saw me in Cuba.
Yeah. Effect on U.S. policy and the sign of, I mean, he's gone before. But
Sure.
I think with respect to President Vladimir Putin, I think that Putin is very focused on the past. I had a chance to meet with him when he was vice mayor of St. Petersburg in the early 90s here in Washington, D.C. And I think that he has a certain attitude about the United States that comes out of his feelings about the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And one of the realities is that I don't think that attitude is going to change much. It's been held for a long time. One of the questions is, what can we do to introduce other Russians to information that's reliable? Dagestan, and I've gotten to know them on trips back and forth, and I was in Moscow. In talking with them, their focus is on the future, and what do they do about, the virtual caliphate that is radicalizing young people? They're Muslim, so they're Muslim, and in their state, this information that's coming in on the internet, or access to the internet, as well as imams who are coming in and radicalizing youth, they see this as an area where the United States and Russia should be coordinating our efforts in order to confront this problem and in order to recognize the true threats long-term to our societies. I think that that's where a lot of our efforts should go, is speaking to Duma members and speaking to others in Russian society, so that as this problem is amplified in southern Russia, and you can see what's happening in Dagestan, on an almost monthly basis now, with serious incidents of attacks, and it's the local Muslim community that bears the brunt of this. How could we work with Russia on some of these very real challenges going forward? Yes, sir.
Thanks, Elliot. I wanted to sort of shift to a different part of the world and ask you about East Asia. You've been very outspoken on the comfort women issue, Mr. Chen. And it's sort of something that continues to dog relations between South Korea and Japan, and it's also an issue to the U.S. given its interest in the region. To get your thoughts on what kind of actions you would like to see each side take in order to smooth relations generally.
During the Second World War, and that this would probably further ignite, apprehension in Korea and China and around the region, and that we had a lot of common ground with Abe in terms of things we could work on, but that he needed to back away from this road on not just the comfort woman issue, but also on some of these statements about that his political party is making about Japanese conduct overall and the Japanese Imperial Army during the war. I think it's very unfortunate that he's gone down this road. I've spoken to him about it. I've spoken to his cabinet members about it, and I've spoken to members of the Japanese Diet in order to privately try to convince them that raising these issues is injurious in terms of Japanese interests, and frankly creates a tremendous amount of instability in the region. And our goal clearly is to make the region more stable. That will mean more economic growth. The United States has enormous interest. I mean, you look at where the economic growth is occurring over the next decade, this is the region. And this is very unsettling. And it's a flashpoint which we have to handle. So
we're going to, let me just give you a quick time check. We've got about 15 minutes left, and lots of people who want to ask questions. We'll do this the best we can. We're going to end at 10 in order to keep our deal with the chairman. Christina Wong, Deb Reichman, Guy Taylor, Nicole Goet, John Hudson, Felicia Swartz, and Tristan Bloom.
Yes.
Christina.
Thank you. On Syria, the administration recently requested $500 million for equipping and training Syrian rebels. That won't likely be approved until later this year or next year. Do the moderate Syrian rebels have enough time as they're facing, advances by ISIS, very rapid advances? So, is there time, to wait for that? Should we be doing something more? And then also on Afghanistan, are you worried that the longer the election drags on, it will be less likely that we might get a BSA signed?
Right. Well, first, on this issue of Syria, I give Elliot Engel of New York enormous credit here. 3 years ago, I remember Elliot explaining to the administration that at that point there were no foreign fighters. There was no ISIS. There were no foreign fighters in Syria. And his suggestion was you have the Free Syrian Army. It's representative of, not just diverse religious and ethnic groups, but, it's attempting to hold the country together. So get in and support this. And of course, we had the French ambassador here arguing the same thing. And meeting after meeting, we conveyed this. I personally spoke to the president about it once. But on up, throughout the administration, we pushed for about 3 years' time to try to get support to the Free Syrian Army. So now we're 3 years later, and we're talking about doing this. And in the meantime, ISIS obviously, the foreign fighters came in, they established this beachhead, nothing was done to dislodge it. And remember, Assad himself did not attack ISIS till very recently. He allowed it to be established because he could see that
There's some kind of a brewing between the United States and Russia, within the talks. Do you know anything about that? And
No, I don't. About that rift, I do not.
there's some people in Moscow who are alleging that the United States is dragging its feet, in the talks, and that they are the ones who are kind of stalling things.
Well, I can imagine they can believe anything in Moscow because it is a conspiratorial mindset right now in terms of the way they view the United States. But I don't know that to be the case at all.
Guy?
Congressman, thank you so much for covering so much ground here. Sure. Can I just drag you back to something a few minutes ago?
Right.
It sounded like you sort of veered into saying that you had a private conversation with Xi Jinping,
No, I said the premier,
you
not the
spoke with
president.
Chinese premier, and you were speaking
Premier.
kind of quietly for a second.
yeah.
He was telling you that
No, I was just explaining the view from China about that they can understand why we believe that Iran may not be rational actors in the sense that Moscow and in the sense that Beijing and in the sense that Washington, D.C. are rational actors. I had laid out our concerns, and he acknowledged that he could understand those concerns, and that's what I was expressing.
thank you for,
Premier Lee.
okay.
Nicole?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for doing this. I wanted to take you back to Germany. Tensions over surveillance, not to mention sort of political espionage, have been brewing for a year. Do you think that the administration could have done more to diffuse this? And what can you tell us of their efforts to do so?
I don't know. I don't know how much the administration could have done to diffuse it. I know what we're trying to do with our discussions.
Do you feel the Germans are being overly sensitive?
Well, obviously, as I stated earlier, before the Germans cast aspersions about this subject, I think elected representatives in Germany should probably inquire in terms of what the practices of their intelligence service. I think it might put things in perspective. Other questions?
The administration could have, the Germans have been asking for some sort of agreement that would, to use the president's words, show sort of respect for the German people, the same respect that are shown to Americans.
I understand, but I do not know the details of those negotiations between the White House and the Chancellor, so I can't speak to...
What they did. Can you speak to what you think they should do?
I think that given the circumstances, the administration is attempting, I think, at this time, to deal with the German government, and I'm hopeful that they're successful in this.
Mr. Hudson?
Chairman, one of the things you said I've never really been able to wrap my head around, and this is the idea that the Senate had to pass the Kirk-Menendez sanctions in order to increase the leverage that we had over Iran ahead of the deal.
Right, because then you'd have a veto proof. If they passed it, They over.
60 co-sponsors for the Kirk Menendez have signed on as co-sponsors. The administration is just saying we can't do it now because it might blow up a deal, but we will also impose sanctions if the deal doesn't go through.
No. Wait a minute. You're assuming everybody is as sophisticated as those of us around this table about the way that the political process works in terms of the House and the Senate. All they see is where's the political will in the United States. If it passes and it is veto-proof, it's then law. That's law. That's something they have to pay attention to. If it doesn't, then that's something they don't deal with. I think we talked a little bit about the distance that the Ayatollah has. It's the Ayatollah himself that's making the decisions on this. I mean, after all, he's the fellow that picked the half-dozen candidates who he said could run, Rouhani being one of them. Right? So he's the final decision maker on this. How much of this does he understand? There's either those types of crippling sanctions or there are not. And because of the opposition from the administration, that legislation did not go through the Senate because we were just shy of the 2/3 we needed.
Felicia.
So on a totally different note, you were critical of giving Abu Khatallah legal rights. But now he's had 3 appearances in front of judges here, and I was just wondering what you're thinking about the trials against
Okay,
him.
first of all, I was not critical of giving him legal rights. What I was critical of was giving him the full legal rights that every American citizen would have. An enemy combatant, I would argue, does not have those full legal rights, including Miranda rights. And in my view, Mr. Khatallah, having been in full view and done a half-dozen interviews with major news networks, including some that are here right now at this table, having done that, in Libya, some from his resort or his home, seaside home, being in full view for so many months, it would have been much more practical to take him into custody, to have him go to Guantanamo Bay, to do the thorough investigative process, which may have given us the leads to more of those involved in his terrorist network in Libya. And so I think we missed that opportunity. Second, I think transferring him for trial to Washington, D.C., rather than, ideally you would transfer him to Guantanamo Bay. His secondary choice would probably be the Southern District of New York, where we would have the expertise to deal with this. To have a relatively new prosecutor to this type of case and having it done in Washington, D.C., I think is to lose opportunity to get information that could help us stop additional terrorist activity, because in the past we were able, when we took people into custody and we did interrogate them, we were able to get actionable intelligence that better protected the security of the United States and our allies.
Kristen?
Do you think that the administration's actions regarding the crisis in Iraq have been sufficient? Does it concern you how much military assistance they've been accepting from Russia and Syria?
Have our actions been sufficient? No. No, our actions and our dealings with the government in Iraq have not been sufficient, and it was very necessary. Religious leader explained the necessity of him stepping down. That is absolutely true. He's got to go. And then cohesively, the Iranian state can be put, then Iran is a viable institution if you're inclusive with the different ethnic groups in the country and religious groups in the country. It's very unfortunate that more pressure wasn't kept on him throughout the process, and he's eroded the position of the Iraqi state as a result.
We've got about 2 minutes left. Clara, do you have one?
Yeah,
Quick one.
I was hoping you might weigh in on the situation in Israel, especially because we have the July 20th deadline coming up with the negotiations with Iran. Is the situation in Israel going to affect at all what the United States seeks out of those negotiations, or how does it at all change maybe what our calculus is?
I don't know that it directly changes our calculus, but there is one aspect of what's happening, and I saw this myself. I was in Israel during the Second Lebanon War, And I was in Haifa when, these rockets were coming in. The question was, who was the enabler? Who allowed Hezbollah at that point in time to have the wherewithal, to blanket that city? I was in Rambam Hospital, 600 victims in there. The answer was, it was Iran and it was Syria. So in this circumstance, who is the enabler for Hamas? Where do they get those rockets? The answer again, Iran. And the fact that Iran would transfer to them these new longer range rockets that can now hit Tel Aviv, that can now hit Jerusalem, and that they're firing them off, and the fact that they've got such a massive inventory, which shows how much Iran has put into this, that does raise the issue of how Iran is a proliferator, right? And so that's the other aspect of what we worry about a little bit when we're trying to negotiate with Iran. How do you stop this penchant for proliferation, which they do with rockets and missiles and other types of ordnance?
That's a very nice end. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dave.
Thanks for doing it.
Thanks for the opportunity.